Welcome to Paranormal Pages. Let's get straight into the true scary stories. Story 1. Turn back now. It started as a routine trip back home after a weekend spent visiting my sister. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the winding country roads. I had driven these roads countless times before, the GPS on my phone merely a formality. As I approached a familiar intersection, the calm voice of the GPS broke the silence. Turn around when possible. I frowned, glancing at the screen. The route was correct, there was no reason to turn around. Shrugging it off, I continued driving. A few minutes later, the GPS repeated its instruction, turn around when possible. This time, the voice seemed slightly off, a hint of urgency threading through the normally monotonous tone. I chalked it up to a glitch and kept driving, determined to reach home before darkness fully descended. 10 minutes passed in silence, the only sound being the hum of the car's engine and the occasional rustle of leaves in the wind. Just as I began to relax, the GPS spoke again, louder and more insistent, turn around now. My hands tightened on the steering wheel. There was an edge to the voice now, something that set my nerves on edge. I glanced at the screen again, noting the correct route displayed. Something wasn't right, but I pushed the thought away, focusing on the road ahead. As I passed through a particularly dense stretch of forest, the sky now a deep shade of twilight, the GPS spoke again, its voice desperate, almost pleading, please, turn around now. My heart skipped a beat, and I pulled the car to the side of the road, staring at the device. The voice had changed, it sounded almost human, filled with an emotion that no machine should possess. I turned the GPS off, deciding to rely on my memory to get me home. Continuing my drive, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The road seemed longer than usual, the trees casting eerie shadows that danced in the headlights. As I approached a sharp bend, I saw something in the distance, a figure standing by the side of the road. I slowed down, squinting to get a better look. The figure was shrouded in darkness, but as my car drew closer, I saw it was a woman, her eyes wide with fear. I rolled down the window, intending to ask if she needed help, but before I could speak, she screamed, turn around. You have to turn around. Her voice was the same as the GPS, filled with a desperation that chilled me to the bone. My blood ran cold, and I slammed my foot on the gas, speeding away from the terrifying figure. My heart pounded in my chest as her scream echoed in my ears, growing fainter as I drove further away. Panic set in as I realized I had no idea where I was. The road twisted and turned, the familiar landmarks replaced by an unsettling landscape of shadows and darkness. I checked my phone, but it had no signal. I was alone, lost in a place that seemed to grow more sinister with each passing minute. The voice in my head was relentless, repeating the haunting command, turn around. Hey! Subscribe for more true scary stories. My heart pounded in my chest as I pressed on, the woman's desperate scream still echoing in my mind. The road seemed to stretch endlessly before me, each bend revealing only more darkness. With every passing moment, the sense of dread grew stronger. I glanced at my phone again, still no signal. The GPS was off, but its final command lingered like a ghost in the car, turn around. After what felt like an eternity, I saw a faint glow ahead. My hopes surged at the sight of a dimly lit gas station. I pulled in, the crunch of gravel under my tires breaking the eerie silence. The place looked abandoned, but the lights were on, casting an unsettling glow over the cracked pavement. I stepped out of the car, the night air cool against my skin. I approached the door and pushed it open, a bell jingling weakly above. Inside, the air was thick with dust, and the shelves were sparsely stocked. An old man sat behind the counter, his eyes hidden under the brim of a worn cap. He looked up as I entered, his gaze piercing through the dim light. Can I help you? He asked, his voice gravelly and ancient. I'm lost, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. My GPS keeps telling me to turn around, but it doesn't make any sense. Do you know the way to Ashton? The old man's expression darkened. Ashton? You shouldn't be out on these roads at night. They're not safe. He glanced towards the window, as if expecting to see something lurking in the darkness. "If your GPS told you to turn around, you should listen." A chill ran down my spine. "Why? What's out there?" He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper. "There are things in these woods. Spirits, monsters, call them what you will. They prey on those who lose their way. The GPS, it's just trying to protect you." I swallowed hard, my mouth dry. "That's crazy. How can a GPS know that?" "Sometimes, technology taps into things it shouldn't," he replied cryptically. "It sees the paths we don't. You need to get back on the road and follow its directions. It might be the only thing keeping you safe." The weight of his words settled over me, a suffocating blanket of fear. I nodded, backing away slowly. "Thank you," I muttered, turning to leave. "Wait," he called after me. "Take this." He handed me a small, rusty key. "There's an old church a few miles back. If you find yourself in trouble, this might help." I took the key, its metal cold against my palm. "Thank you," I repeated, more sincerely this time. I hurried back to my car, my mind racing. The encounter had only deepened the mystery, but I had no choice but to follow his advice. I turned the GPS back on, and it immediately resumed its frantic command, "Turn around now." Taking a deep breath, I put the car in reverse and followed its instructions. As I retraced my route, the road seemed to close in around me, the trees forming a tunnel of darkness. The key in my pocket felt heavier with each passing mile, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me from the shadows. The old man's words echoed in my mind, a constant reminder of the danger that lurked just out of sight. Suddenly, the GPS gave a new command, "Turn left ahead." I followed it obediently, my heart pounding as I turned onto a narrow, overgrown path. The car's headlights barely pierced the darkness, revealing a dilapidated church at the end of the road. I parked and stepped out, clutching the key tightly. The air was thick with an oppressive silence, broken only by the distant howl of the wind. The old church stood before me like a forgotten sentinel, its ancient stones weathered by time and neglect. Vines crawled up its walls, and the windows were darkened with grime. I approached cautiously, the rusty key clutched in my hand. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying faint, ghostly echoes that sent shivers down my spine. I inserted the key into the lock, the metal grinding against the old mechanism. With a creak, the door swung open, revealing a dim interior lit only by the faint glow of the moon filtering through broken windows. The air inside was musty, filled with the scent of decay and forgotten prayers. I stepped inside, my footsteps echoing in the empty space. As I moved deeper into the church, I felt a strange presence, an energy that seemed to pulse through the air. The pews were covered in dust, and cobwebs draped from the rafters like ghostly shrouds. At the far end of the church, the altar stood draped in a tattered cloth, a large crucifix hanging above it. The silence was overwhelming, pressing down on me from all sides. I approached the altar, drawn by an inexplicable force. As I got closer, I noticed something strange. Carved into the stone floor was a series of symbols, their meaning lost to time. The air grew colder, and I felt a chill seep into my bones. Suddenly, the GPS voice crackled to life, the tone now eerily calm. "You are here. You must perform the ritual." "What ritual?" I whispered, my voice trembling. The GPS provided no answer, but as I looked around, I noticed a small book on the altar, its cover worn and pages yellowed with age. I picked it up, my hand shaking, and opened it to the first page. The text was written in an old, almost unreadable script, but I could make out a few words. "To banish the darkness, one must light the way." Instinctively, I looked around for candles and found a few scattered on the altar. I fumbled for my lighter and began to light them one by one. As the flames flickered to life, the symbols on the floor began to glow with an eerie, blue light. The chill in the air intensified, and I felt the presence grow stronger, almost suffocating in its intensity. Suddenly, a loud bang echoed through the church, and the front door slammed shut. I spun around, heart racing, and saw a shadowy figure standing at the entrance. The figure stepped forward, its form becoming more defined. It was the woman from the roadside, her eyes now hollow and filled with an unnatural light. "Turn back," she whispered, her voice a haunting echo. "You must turn back." "I don't understand," I said, backing away. "What do you want from me?" "You are the key," she replied, her voice growing louder. "The darkness will consume you unless you perform the ritual. Light the way, or be lost forever." Panic surged through me, and I turned back to the book, desperately trying to decipher the next steps. The flames of the candles danced wildly, casting grotesque shadows on the walls. The symbols on the floor pulsed with a life of their own, and the air vibrated with a low, ominous hum. I read the next passage aloud, my voice shaking. "To complete the ritual, one must offer a piece of their soul. Only then will the darkness be banished." My mind raced, trying to comprehend the meaning of the words. The woman's figure loomed closer, her presence oppressive. I looked around, desperate for a way out, but the door was sealed shut, the windows barred by some invisible force. The only way forward was through the ritual, and the realization filled me with dread. With trembling hands, I continued to read, each word resonating with a strange power. "Offer your blood to the altar, and speak the words of light. Only then will you find the path home." I felt a sudden sharp pain in my hand and looked down to see a small cut, blood oozing from the wound. I moved to the altar, letting my blood drip onto the ancient stone. The symbols flared brighter, and the air hummed with energy. I closed my eyes and spoke the final words, my voice barely a whisper. "Lux et tenebris, ad lucem redeo." As the final words left my lips, the air around me seemed to explode with light and sound. The ground trembled beneath my feet, and a deafening roar filled the church. The glowing symbols on the floor pulsed violently, casting eerie shadows that danced in the flickering candlelight. The woman's figure began to fade, her form dissolving into wisps of smoke. Suddenly, a blinding flash enveloped the church, and I was thrown to the ground. When the light finally subsided, I found myself lying on the cold stone floor, the candles extinguished, and the church plunged into darkness. The oppressive presence had lifted, but an unsettling silence now hung in the air. I slowly got to my feet, my head spinning from the ordeal. The symbols on the floor had faded, and the air felt lighter, as if a great weight had been lifted. I looked around, trying to make sense of what had just happened. The book lay open on the altar, its pages now blank, as if the words had never existed. I stepped outside, the night air cool against my skin. The moon hung low in the sky, casting an ethereal glow over the landscape. My car was still parked where I had left it, and I hurried towards it, eager to leave this nightmare behind. As I reached the car, my phone buzzed to life, the GPS displaying a new route, one that led directly home. Relief washed over me as I started the engine and began to drive. The road ahead was clear, the oppressive darkness now a distant memory. But as I drove, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still watching me, lurking just beyond the edge of the headlights. The old man's words echoed in my mind, a constant reminder of the danger that still lingered. As I neared the outskirts of Ashton, the familiar sights brought a sense of comfort. The sun was beginning to rise, casting a warm glow over the town. I pulled into my driveway, exhaustion weighing heavily on my shoulders. I stumbled into the house, collapsing onto the couch. Sleep took me almost instantly, my dreams filled with shadows and echoes of the night's events. When I awoke, the sun was high in the sky, and the events of the previous night seemed like a distant nightmare. I picked up my phone, expecting to see missed calls and messages, but there was nothing. The GPS was still on, displaying the same route that had brought me home. I turned it off, my mind racing with questions. Days passed, and I tried to resume my normal routine, but the memory of the church and the ritual haunted me. I couldn't escape the feeling that I had been marked by something, that the darkness had left its imprint on my soul. The old man's warning echoed in my mind, a constant reminder of the price I had paid. One evening, as I sat alone in my living room, a cold breeze swept through the house. The lights flickered, and the air grew thick with an oppressive silence. I looked around, heart pounding, and saw a shadow move across the wall. Panic surged through me, and I reached for my phone, the screen lighting up with a familiar message, "Turn around." My blood ran cold as the GPS voice spoke again, its tone now a whisper, filled with dread. "You must turn back. It's not over." I dropped the phone, my hands shaking. The shadow on the wall grew darker, more defined. I could hear faint whispers, growing louder with each passing second. The room seemed to close in around me, the darkness pressing down, suffocating. I backed away, my mind racing with fear. The shadow took shape, becoming the figure of the woman, her eyes hollow and filled with an unnatural light. She stepped forward, her voice echoing through the room, "You must turn back, or be consumed by the darkness." I screamed, my voice a desperate plea for escape. But there was no escape, only the looming presence of the darkness that had followed me home. The ritual had not banished it, it had merely delayed the inevitable. The shadow reached out, its touch cold and final. And then, everything went black. Hey! Subscribe for more true scary stories. Story 2. The Echo in the Glass. The old Victorian house stood isolated on the edge of town, a sentinel of forgotten memories. I moved in, eager to escape the noise of the city and start anew. The place was cheap, probably due to its eerie reputation, but I didn't believe in ghost stories, at least, not then. My first night was uneventful, filled with the sounds of creaking wood and the occasional rustle from the attic. It wasn't until I explored the house the next day that I discovered the mirror in the basement, covered in a heavy, dusty cloth. Pulling the cloth away, I revealed an ornate, full-length mirror. The glass was fogged with age, and as I wiped it clean, my reflection emerged, pale and unfamiliar. I laughed at my own appearance, blaming the dim lighting and the chill in the air. But as I turned away, something strange happened. I caught a glimpse of my reflection moving out of sync, the figure's eyes wide and hollow. I froze, heart pounding, but when I looked again, everything seemed normal. Days passed, and I couldn't shake the feeling that the mirror was watching me. It wasn't just paranoia, there was an unsettling presence in the house, growing stronger with each passing hour. The air was thick with tension, and every shadow seemed to stretch towards me. The unease gnawed at my sanity, especially when I began hearing whispers, faint but persistent, like a distant conversation happening just out of earshot. One evening, I was brushing my teeth when I saw it again. My reflection blinked. Not a casual blink, but a slow, deliberate motion that made my blood run cold. I stared, waiting for a logical explanation, but the figure in the mirror just stared back, a mocking smile playing at its lips. Panic surged through me, and I reached out, touching the cold glass, hoping to break the illusion. My fingers met solid glass, but my reflection's fingers seemed to sink slightly, as if touching water. The occurrences became more frequent. I avoided the mirror, but it felt like it was drawing me in, pulling me towards its dark depths. I started seeing things, figures in the corners of my eyes, flickering lights, and shadows that moved on their own. The house itself seemed to change, rooms shifting in dimensions, doors leading to places they shouldn't. I knew something was wrong, something beyond the realm of the natural. Then, the dreams started. Vivid, terrifying dreams where I was trapped in the mirror, a prisoner of my own reflection. In those dreams, the house was a labyrinth of endless hallways, and the only way out was to face the creature that wore my face. It taunted me, mimicking my voice, my thoughts, my fears. I woke up each morning drenched in sweat, my heart racing, the mirror's presence looming over me. As the days turned into weeks, the line between reality and nightmare blurred. I knew I couldn't stay in that house any longer, but every attempt to leave felt futile. The mirror had become a gateway, and something was trying to cross over. I was trapped in a web of my own making, and the creature in the mirror was growing stronger, bolder. The whispers were louder now, the shadows darker, and the reflection, my reflection, seemed more alive than ever. Days in the house grew longer, each one a test of my sanity. I found myself avoiding mirrors altogether, yet I couldn't escape the feeling of being watched. It was as if the walls themselves were eyes, observing my every move. The air was suffocating, heavy with the unspoken presence that lurked in the shadows. I tried to distract myself with books, music, anything to drown out the silence, but nothing could shake the feeling of dread that settled deep in my bones. One afternoon, while searching for a box of old photos, I stumbled upon an old journal tucked away in a drawer. It belonged to the previous owner, a man named Henry Cartwright. His handwriting was neat, meticulous, but as I read, it grew more frantic. He spoke of the mirror in the basement, how it had been in his family for generations. According to Henry, the mirror was a cursed relic, a portal to a dark realm where an entity awaited a chance to escape. He warned of a mirror demon, a creature that mimicked its victims, stealing their souls if given the chance. Henry's final entries were the most disturbing. He described seeing his reflection act independently, much like I had experienced. The last page was smudged and torn, but the final words were clear: do not trust the mirror. It is a liar, a thief of souls. It will take you if you let it. A chill ran down my spine. Henry's fate was unknown, but his warning was clear. I needed to get rid of the mirror before it was too late. That night, I decided to cover the mirror once and for all. As I approached the basement, a cold draft greeted me. The door creaked open, and I descended the stairs, the light dimming with each step. When I reached the bottom, I noticed something odd. The mirror was uncovered, its surface gleaming in the faint light. My heart pounded in my chest as I approached it. How could it be uncovered? I hadn't touched it since that first day. As I stood before the mirror, my reflection stared back, seemingly normal. I hesitated, then reached for the cloth. But before I could cover the mirror, my reflection began to change. Its eyes darkened, and a twisted smile spread across its face. My breath caught in my throat as it mouthed words I couldn't hear. Panic surged through me, and I turned to leave, but the door slammed shut with a deafening bang. I was trapped. The room grew colder, and I could feel the presence behind me. I forced myself to turn back to the mirror, my eyes locking with the twisted version of myself. It seemed to laugh silently, its eyes filled with malice. Then, without warning, it stepped forward, pressing against the glass as if trying to break free. I stumbled back, horrified, as the mirror began to warp and ripple like water. The figure's hand reached out, fingers clawing at the air. Desperate, I grabbed the cloth and threw it over the mirror. The room instantly fell silent, the temperature returning to normal. I stood there, shaking, the echo of my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. For a moment, I thought I was safe. But then I noticed something on the floor, a single, wet footprint leading away from the mirror. It wasn't mine. The realization hit me like a sledgehammer. The creature had crossed over, and it was in the house with me. The days following the incident in the basement were a waking nightmare. The house had become a labyrinth of shifting shadows and echoing footsteps. I could feel the presence of the creature that had escaped the mirror, its cold breath on the back of my neck, its laughter hidden in the creaking walls. Sleep was no refuge. The moment I closed my eyes, I was pulled into a twisted realm where my reflection awaited, taunting and malevolent. I tried to rationalize it all, stress, an overactive imagination, but nothing explained the inexplicable occurrences. The footprint had dried, but the unease remained. The mirror was now a permanent fixture in my mind, an unrelenting reminder of the terror lurking within. I decided to research more about the mirror's origins, hoping to find a way to banish the entity. My search led me to local legends about the Cartwright family and their dark history. The Cartwrights were rumored to be practitioners of the occult, dabbling in dark rituals and forbidden magic. The mirror, it seemed, was a key element in their practices, a conduit for summoning and trapping otherworldly beings. They believed that by binding a soul to the mirror, they could harness its power. But something had gone horribly wrong, and the entity within had turned against them. The last of the Cartwrights had sealed the mirror, hoping to contain the malevolent force, but it was too late. The creature was already too strong. One evening, as I sat in the dimly lit study, I heard a soft whisper. At first, I thought it was the wind, but the voice became clearer. It was coming from the walls, the very fabric of the house. "Let me in," it murmured, over and over, a chilling mantra that set my nerves on edge. I tried to ignore it, but the whispers grew louder, more insistent. It was as if the house itself was urging me towards the mirror, a compulsion I couldn't resist. With trembling hands, I descended into the basement. The air was thick with a palpable tension, the shadows darker and more oppressive. The mirror stood there, covered and silent, but I could feel the entity's presence on the other side, waiting. I knew I couldn't destroy the mirror, that would only free the creature completely. I had to find another way to trap it, to seal it back into its glass prison. I began to recall the rituals described in Henry's journal. There were passages about binding and banishment, spells meant to contain the malevolent spirits. I gathered the necessary items, a candle, a piece of chalk, and a silver knife, my hands shaking as I drew the sigils around the mirror. The air grew colder, the whispers more frantic. I felt the creature's anger, its frustration. It knew what I was trying to do. As I chanted the incantation, the mirror began to tremble, the glass rippling like a disturbed pond. The room filled with an otherworldly wind, blowing out the candle and shrouding everything in darkness. In the pitch black, I could see my reflection, glowing with a pale light, its eyes filled with hatred. It slammed against the glass, its mouth moving in silent screams. I could feel its rage, its desire to break free and consume me. Suddenly, the mirror's surface shattered, shards of glass flying in all directions. I shielded my face, feeling the sting of the cuts. When I opened my eyes, the reflection was gone. The room was silent, the air still. I had done it. I had banished the creature, or so I thought. But then, I saw it, a crack running down the middle of the mirror, and from within, a dark, shadowy figure emerging. It wasn't over. The creature had found another way, and it was free. The sight of the shadowy figure emerging from the cracked mirror sent a jolt of terror through me. It was no longer bound by the glass, but neither was it fully corporeal. It moved with a fluid grace, its form shifting and twisting, a dark blur against the dim light of the basement. I stumbled back, feeling the cold concrete under my hands as I scrambled to my feet. The room felt colder, the shadows more oppressive, as if the very house was closing in on me. "Who are you?" I whispered, my voice barely audible over the pounding of my heart. The figure paused, then tilted its head, a grotesque mimicry of curiosity. It was almost human, but its features were distorted, a grotesque parody of my own face. Its eyes glowed with an unholy light, and when it spoke, its voice was a chorus of whispers, as if multiple voices were speaking through it. "I am you," it said, the words echoing in the confined space. "I am your reflection, the darkness within." I backed away, my mind racing. This wasn't just a creature from another realm, it was a manifestation of my deepest fears, my darkest thoughts. The mirror had not just reflected my appearance, it had reflected my soul, the parts of me I tried to hide. And now, that darkness was free, given form by the cursed object in the basement. The entity advanced, its movements slow and deliberate, as if savoring the moment. Desperation clawed at my mind. I had to stop it, but how? The rituals had failed, and I had no other weapons at my disposal. The creature seemed to sense my hopelessness, its smile widening, revealing sharp, shadowy teeth. It raised a hand, and I felt a cold grip around my throat, choking off my breath. Panic set in, and I struggled, clawing at the invisible force, but it was no use. The darkness was overwhelming, consuming. In that moment of despair, I remembered the silver knife. It was still in my pocket, a last remnant of my failed ritual. My hand closed around the hilt, and with a desperate cry, I plunged it into the creature's chest. There was a moment of resistance, then a burst of icy cold as the blade sank into the shadowy form. The creature shrieked, a sound like 1,000 voices crying out in agony. It recoiled, its grip loosening, and I gasped for air, falling to my knees. The entity writhed, the silver blade glowing with an otherworldly light. The shadows around it began to dissipate, and for a moment, I thought I had won. But then, with a final, shuddering breath, the creature lunged at me. Its form collapsed around me, enveloping me in darkness. I felt a coldness seep into my skin, my very soul, as the world around me faded away. The last thing I saw was my own reflection in the shattered mirror, staring back at me with eyes full of terror. I woke up in my bed, drenched in sweat. The morning light filtered through the curtains, casting long shadows on the walls. It felt like a dream, a terrible, vivid nightmare. But as I sat up, I noticed the cuts on my arms, the faint pain in my chest. It had been real. I rushed to the basement, hoping to find some evidence, some proof of the horror I had faced. But the mirror was gone, the basement empty and undisturbed. I returned to my room, feeling a strange emptiness. As I washed my face, I glanced into the bathroom mirror. My reflection stared back, calm and familiar. But then, it blinked. A cold chill ran down my spine. I looked closer, and my reflection smiled, a dark, knowing smile. The creature had one. It was inside me now, a part of me, and there was no escaping it. The mirror had been a portal, not just for the entity, but for the darkness within myself. I was trapped, a prisoner of my own reflection, forever haunted by the monster that now wore my face. The end. Subscribe for more true scary stories. Thanks for watching.